Hi, my name is Pastor Hal York, and welcome to Truth in the Trenches. Today we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 17, verse 3. The crucible is for silver, and the furnace is for gold, and the Lord tests hearts. When I was growing up, I haven't heard it recently, but you'd be watching TV and all of a sudden you come over the screen, a big red screen with blaring noises coming out of the speakers. And it would say, this is a test of the emergency broadcast system. If this was a real emergency, you would be directed to certain information would come up on the screen. You'd be told where to call and so on. But it was always nice to hear those words. This is just a test. Because that's good news if they're testing a warning system that would be set off in the event of an emergency or a disaster, or maybe an air raid. And you're glad to hear it's just a test. You're glad it's working just in case you ever need it. But when you walk into a classroom, when your teacher says to you, this is just a test, there's no such thing as just a test in school. So you have a different reaction. This test is to see if we've studied. This test is to see what we know. This test is real and it matters. And here we read in this verse that the Lord tests the hearts. God knows what's in our hearts, but often we don't, but we think we do. The heart is deceitful, and we can convince ourselves we may be something when we are not. God tests the hearts of his people, and he does it in different ways. There's a testing of the desert, Deuteronomy 8:2. And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. There's a testing of false teaching in Deuteronomy 13:3. You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you, to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. There's the testing of adversity. This is probably the most common one. Peter talks about this. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you've been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And then there's what Proverbs calls a testing of praise. Proverbs 27:21. The crucible is for silver, and the furnace is for gold, and a man is tested by his praise. How do you know if faith is real? It is tested. How do you know if you really believe what you say you believe about God, who he is, his love for you, his care for you, his sovereignty over us and over this world? God tests us not so he can learn about us, but so that we can learn what is really going on in our own heart. What has this last year, this pandemic, this test revealed about your heart and where you are spiritually and what's been going on in your heart and in your life in these last few months? Think of the Apostle Peter. He was full of bravado in the upper room. Though all forsake you, I will remain true. I will follow you to death if I have to. But he didn't know his own heart. For just a few hours later, he was denying he even knew Christ. It's one thing to promise faithfulness surrounded by your friends and Jesus and everything is peaceful and easy. But what about when it might cost you everything? He learned something about himself by failing this test that would make him stronger in his Christian life. He learned that his flesh was weak, and it's true for all of us. But it's often hard for us to believe until the test comes. We often believe that we're really living by faith when we're really just living in the power of the flesh because life was easy. But tests reveal what we were really trusting in. If we trust in ourselves, our flesh, and our own strength, we will never pass these tests. God knows the heart and the mind, and he tests them so we can know. So we can learn that without Christ, we can do nothing. In those times when life gets hard in the desert and all our props have been taken away and life seems to have come to a standstill, seems barren in some respects. If God doesn't provide, we have nowhere else to turn. In those times, what do? In discouragement, in those dark days, maybe it's those desert times again, maybe for a few days, months, or for Israel, it was 40 years. Would they continue to trust him? Would they continue to walk with him? This is a test. Praise is probably the hardest test. It feeds the flesh, it pumps it up, it's like a drug, and we just want more and more of it. But God tests the hearts because he loves us. These tests are not meant to punish us, but to sanctify us. For some, these tests reveal their faith was not genuine. They really weren't believers. But for the believer, Like Paul, we learn that Christ's strength is made perfect in our weakness, and we get to know him, and our love is strengthened and faith grows in him as we learn more and more about him and his faithfulness to us. This is just a test. Pay close attention to what your test reveals about your heart, and ask the Lord to root out those things, attitudes, and sins that are hindering your spiritual growth and your walk with the Lord, and they become evident as we're tested. So be thankful for tests. They're meant to bring you closer to Christ and to weaken the flesh, and to remind us that God loves us, he's faithful, and that we need to trust him more and more every day. Remember, the Lord tests hearts, and he will test yours. May this truth guide us and guard us in the trenches of life as we seek to live for the glory of God and the good of others. May God bless.